Welcome to HCS Connects. I'm Kelly Gorel with Hampton City Schools. Today we have a very special guest with us, our new Chief Financial Officer, Ms. Brittany Dortch. So welcome to HCS Connects.
Thank you for having me.
Well, I'm very excited to have you. As I said, you are our new Chief Financial Officer, but you've really been here for about 6 or 7 months. You came on, I believe, in July or August, correct?
August, yes.
August, and you have been a great member of our team here in Hampton.
Thank you.
And we're very excited to have you because it's budget season.
Yes, yes it is.
So that's a very busy time for you.
Yes.
And a confusing time sometimes to our staff members or our community at large because budget is very complicated.
Yes.
So we're glad to have you here today to kind of walk us through the process. So tell us, what is the process of developing that budget for the school system?
So the budget development process starts fairly early. I think probably more early than anyone really would think. So we start the process in about late fall, and that kind of helps us to start the planning process. And we try to get out our non-personnel budget packets. So this would be anything that's not salaries or benefits to our departments, so they can start strategizing what they want to do for the next year. And that's around about November, December timeframe. So then in late December, we get our first kind of look at what our revenues might be based on what the governor has proposed for the upcoming year. And then from there, we're really working the budget. We're looking at, the things that we need to add, the things that, we can potentially have some savings on so that we can eventually balance the budget. So then around about late March, we make sure that we submit our proposed budget. That's approved by the school board to the city manager, and then it gets incorporated into their budget, and then finally in May, then approvals happen.
So it's really not budget season because you're always in season.
Yes, always in season.
and you talk about, the different departments. Around about approximately how many departments have a budget in Hampton City Schools?
Oh, so there is probably over 50. Over 50, because each school is a department. So you would think about the number of schools we have. I mean, that's 20 plus just schools. So then when you talk about, the finance department, human resources, and, those
PR
other
marketing.
PR marketing, those other departments that help support our schools, we're around 50 plus.
And you're looking at transportation and maintenance.
Yes.
Again, and I say this often on this show, when you talk about education, most people, the very first thing they think of is teachers in the classroom.
Yep.
And that is a absolute vital piece
Yes,
of
it
education.
is. Mm-hmm.
But in able to support education and the resources for our students, it does have all those departments between HR, human resources, transportation, finance, budget. And so you're saying that I would even guess that we have probably 50 to 60 different departments that are looking at their budgets and trying to manage those.
Yes.
So when you look at the overall operating budget for the school division, what percentage of that is personnel?
So it's around 80%, and that would include not only the salaries for our staff, but also the fringe benefits that are offered.
So we've got 80% for personnel, 20% for operating budget for all those other different type of
Yes.
Departments and so forth. But again, it's starting that process, like you said, in the fall, where you've got your department heads and directors looking at those, seeing what we may need for next year. Now that's just the operating budget.
Yes.
There are other budgets as well.
There are. So we actually have, our Fund 50, which is our operating budget, but we also have a food and nutrition services budget, and that is the budget that runs the cafeterias within our schools. We also have our reimbursable projects budget. So this is where a lot of our grants are housed, and one of our largest grants that a lot of people may be familiar with is Title I. Then we also have a rental income budget, and this is a budget where we're actually renting out space in our unoccupied buildings, and that is a revenue generator for the school division. And then we also have our athletics fund, which covers all the athletics across the schools in the city.
Well, I will say in my previous life that I was a math teacher, but I'm so glad I'm not CFO because that is a lot to make sure that you're responsible for as far as looking into all that. So you've got this budget process, but really and I like how you said that it's a revenue generating piece for the school division for rentals, those properties, but we don't typically generate revenue. How are we funded?
So school divisions are funded majority by the state. So the state has a set of minimum standards that says, all school divisions have to follow these standards and staffing levels. And that is the main portion that funds school divisions. But then we also have additional state programs, for instance, our Virginia Preschool Initiative program. So that funding from the state helps us to fund programs for 4-year-olds within the city. Now that's based on slots, so that doesn't cover every 4-year-old in the city,
Right.
but the state provides some funding toward that initiative. Then we also receive funds from the city of Hampton as part of their local contribution. And that is, and within the city, is based on a funding formula that's really driven by real estate taxes and property taxes. Then we also receive federal funds. It's not a larger portion of our operating fund, but it helps to fund our ROTC programs that are in our high schools. And then we also receive impact aid funding. So with impact aid, because when you have federal government on properties within a city, then that property is now tax exempt. So the federal government has created this program that says, well, since we have property in your city that you can't collect taxes on,
Right.
Here's another way that we can kind of offset that impact to the locality and to the school. And then we also have other funds, which I call this kind of the catch-all of our miscellaneous funds. And one of our largest revenue items within that category would be revenue that we receive from our grants. So grant funds, they have some grants, not all, but the grants allow for some overhead costs, like our finance, our human resources, our marketing, PR budgets. Those may not be allowable per the grant terms, but they say, you can charge a select percentage and get reimbursed to help cover those costs, because they understand that, there are other departments that go into helping these grant funded programs operate.
So looking at, you said we're funded by state and our locality, the city of Hampton. We know back in 07, 08, 08, 09, there was the economic downfall. And our state funding decreased drastically, and our locality, well, actually the school division had to do lots of different cuts to try to balance that budget. And then our locality, our city helped kind of put in as well as to assist. But are we even back up to the level we were in 08, 09? I mean, we're talking over a decade.
Yeah. So actually looking at the numbers, we are not at the same level of funding from the state that we were right before the recession.
Wow.
And that is something that, school divisions, we're very well aware of.
And struggled.
And struggle with, because, it takes a lot to run a school division. And as we all know, in our personal lives, costs to live and to purchase goods and materials, those things have not stayed stagnant. They've increased. So that happens for the school division. The cost of goods, the cost of having staff, retirement costs, those things all increase.
Medical costs.
Health insurance, that increases. So to not be even at the level we were pre-recession, that is
Over a
something
decade.
Over a decade ago. School divisions, are still, feeling the impact of that.
They're recovering.
now.
They are recovering. And you talked about how the state funds per a specific position. That was the standards of quality, the
Yes.
SOQs. Explain the SOQs to us.
So the standards of quality, that is a minimum level of education services that the state says, every school division has to provide. And as part of that minimum standard, they also say, you should have X amount of teachers, X amount of school counselors, principals, assistant principals, and even support positions. But, it takes a lot more than that minimum level, because one, you have variations in your student populations that you serve. There's different needs that, have to be addressed. I mean, building needs, those aren't the same across divisions. So, when they talk about raises, for example, and they say, teacher raise, that's not necessarily all teachers. For example, I think right now in the formula going for next year, for fiscal year 20, it's around 1,200 teachers. We have over 1,300. So, that's a gap of 100 plus teachers that are not included in that headline that says, all teachers,
Right.
are getting X amount, pay increase. So, those are the things that we have to look at within the budget development process to make sure we.
And if we really did fund, and no school division funds at the standards of quality.
No,
Everybody
no.
funds well above as
Yes.
far as have additional staff.
Yes.
And if we truly went on those standards, we would have larger class sizes. We would not be able to offer the opportunities to our students that we are able to offer, be it different resources,
Different programs.
of study, and so forth. Hampton City Schools funds well above because we have to.
Yes.
We know that that's what's best practice in education.
Yep.
But that's school divisions across the Commonwealth.
Yes.
So everybody's feeling that pinch because whenever the state funds, they fund for those 100 teachers where we may need 200 teachers, or they
Yes.
fund for 4 guidance counselors where we may need 8 guidance counselors. So that's truly coming from the funding then from the city, correct?
Yes, yeah, that is how those gaps typically get met, is from local contributions from the city. There's actually divisions across the state. This isn't necessarily something that I believe Hampton has dealt with, but some of your rural area school divisions, sometimes they have to weigh, can we afford to give a raise because state funding does not cover it all.
Right.
And some have to opt out of doing that.
And you can't say, well, you're the 100 that's funded by the state,
Yep.
so you can have the raise, but you're the 100 that's not funded by the state. And so, you have to treat everybody equally.
Yeah.
So what is the budget forecast? What did the governor come out with?
So within the governor's budget, he's proposed a 5% compensation increase, and that is for SOQ, Standards of Quality funded teachers and support staff. That raise is to be effective July 1, and that is a 2% increase over what was originally put into the fiscal year 20 budget during last year's legislative session. There's also additional at-risk funding, and that funding really helps with funding like coaches and remediation programs, and it's driven by the number of free and reduced lunch students that you have within the school division. There was some additional funding for supplemental lottery funds, which, this is an area where it gives divisions most flexibility on how those funds can be used. Like I said, division needs change from division to division. So having those type of funds to really target, those division specific needs, that's always a good thing to see. And then the governor also proposed some changes to school counselor staffing. And, he's looking to phase in a approach where there's a 1 to 250 pupil to school counselor ratios.
Do you know the ratio now? I've always heard it's like 1 to 500. Is that correct?
Yes, and I believe it's at the elementary level. So just kind of using that as an example, as part of this phase-in approach, the elementary would go from like 1 to 500 to 1, I believe, in 350. So,
wow.
Yeah, that would have an impact.
Yeah, it would. It's additional staff and so forth. So, and I'm putting you on the spot here, when we say standards of quality and that, it funds just those standards of quality positions. Am I correct in saying that would fund about 70% of our staff, our HCS staff?
Yes, so based on the numbers for fiscal year 20, that would be approximately 70% of our staff.
So what's not covered is about 30%
yes.
of our staff.
Yes.
And how much does a 1% raise equate to?
So for every 1% raise that the school division provides for all teachers and staff, it's around $1.4 million.
So 1.4 for a 1%.
For 1%.
And then you look at a 2%, a 3%, a 4%, and then the governor's saying 5%, and really what that could equate to for Hampton City Schools.
Yep, about $6.9 million.
So before we wrap up, how much did you just say? Hold on.
$6.9 million.
Okay, they made me stop there for a minute. I was about to go on to my next question, but $6.9 million made me stop right there with my words. But as we wrap up, what are the school board's priorities as far as this budget as we develop it?
The school board's priorities for fiscal year 20 include competitive compensation, teacher recruitment, the academies of Hampton, because that is an important transformation that we want to make sure we keep at the top of our focus. Also school safety, and that includes looking at our facilities and having upgrades and capital improvements. Student achievement, which is always an ongoing
Always
focus.
on the forefront.
Always on the forefront. And also our community partnerships and relationships.
So that's a lot of priorities.
Yes.
A lot to balance when you talk about all of the budgets.
Yes.
That are, like you said, you've got your Fund 50, which is your operating, but you've got other budgets in there as well. So we're starting that budget process. We will bring a budget to the school board in March.
Yes.
And for their vote of approval, then to go to city council.
Yes.
I think we pretty much covered everything. Can you think of anything else?
I think so.
And it's a pretty complicated subject, so hopefully we did it justice as far
I hope so.
As far as everybody being able to understand, it's kind of almost like budget 101,
Yes.
but it's complicated. Education in itself can be very complicated,
Yeah.
but when you talk about the budget, it's a whole new ballgame. Well, thank you so much for being here today. We really appreciate it.
Thank you.
And thank you all for joining us on HCS Connects. In the meantime, stay connected with us. Follow us on Facebook, YouTube, and Instagram. Jump over to our website or even our YouTube channel. Thanks and have a great day.